You may never believe poverty could push a man into choices that make his heart pound with fear and hope at the same time. But when desperation burns like fire in your chest, when your children cry from hunger, when your pockets are so empty that the rattle of coins sounds like thunder, you realize poverty is not just a condition. It's a weapon, a chain, a monster that forces people into corners they swore they'd never enter. That's the reality of Marcus, a janitor who scrubbed the cold marble floors of one of the richest companies in the city. Every day, dressed in a faded uniform that smelled of bleach and sweat, he walked into a tower of glass and steel where men in suits brushed past him like he was invisible. He pushed his mop while they pushed millions through their pens. He cleaned their footsteps while they planned their next vacation. And though his back ached and his knees screamed with pain, the paycheck barely kept rice on the table. But tonight was different. Tonight, his heart would race with a mixture of dread and temptation. Because one man, the billionaire boss of that empire, was about to make him an offer that would rip open his soul. Before I go deeper into this story, let me stop right here and say this. You need to hit that subscribe button right now. Because what you're about to hear isn't just another story. It's a firestorm of greed, humiliation, betrayal, and revenge. Comment where you're watching from, because this tale is bigger than borders, bigger than nations. It's about the lengths humans will go when poverty grips them by the throat. Marcus often stayed late, cleaning offices when the rest of the building had gone quiet. The silence was heavy, broken only by the squeak of his mop across polished tiles and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights above. He never imagined that the billionaire CEO, the man whose name made the stock market tremble, would step into that silence. But there he was, tall, well-dressed, cufflinks that glittered like gold flames under the lights, his shoes clicking against the floor Marcus had just polished. Marcus froze. The boss rarely even looked at him during the day. Why was he here now, when the world had gone still? The man's eyes carried something cold, something calculating, something dangerous. He didn't waste words. He didn't smile. He just studied Marcus like a hunter sizing up prey. And then, without warning, he dropped the kind of proposal that turns a man's blood to ice. A visa, permanent residence. The one thing Marcus had prayed for, begged for, dreamt of, freedom from the shadows, a chance to build a future in a country that had always treated him like a ghost. But it wasn't free. Oh no, it came with a price. A dark, humiliating, unthinkable price. Marcus's knees trembled. His mouth went dry. His mop slipped from his sweaty grip and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing through the empty hallway like a gunshot. He couldn't believe the words that had just come from the boss's lips. He couldn't believe the choice that now sat heavy in his chest. This wasn't a contract about work. This wasn't about promotion or overtime or a raise. This was about something far more personal, far more degrading. The billionaire wanted Marcus's body, Marcus's bloodline, Marcus's very existence as a bargaining chip, all in exchange for papers. His heart pounded so loud he could hear it in his ears. Poverty had already stolen so much, his pride, his peace, his sleep. Now it wanted his soul. He thought of his children, huddled in the small apartment with its flickering light bulb and peeling walls. He thought of his wife, who worked double shifts and still came home with tired eyes and an empty purse. He thought of the life they could have if he said yes. Green cards, open doors, new beginnings. And he thought of the chains that would tighten around his neck if he accepted. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. The billionaire waited, smirking, his hand resting casually in his pocket as though the whole world bent at his command. He knew Marcus was trapped. He knew poverty had backed him into a corner with no escape. Marcus's legs buckled slightly, his palms sweaty against the handle of his mop. His mind screamed, his pride roared, but his stomach growled louder. Hunger has a way of drowning out dignity. Desperation has a way of twisting morals until survival is the only language left. And so, after what felt like an eternity, Marcus lowered his eyes. The decision carved itself into his heart like a scar. He would say yes, not because he wanted to, not because he agreed with the cruelty, but because poverty had left him no other choice. The billionaire's smirk widened, victory gleaming in his eyes. Papers would be drawn. A secret would be sealed. And Marcus would carry a burden so heavy it would crush him every single day. As Marcus picked up his mop again, his hand shook violently. He was no longer just a janitor scrubbing floors. He was now a pawn in a game far bigger than himself. A game of power, greed, and humiliation. And though he had said yes, deep down, something inside him whispered, this choice would come back to burn them both. The days that followed felt like walking through fire barefoot. Marcus had thought poverty was humiliating enough, but nothing prepared him for the shame that now clung to his skin like a second uniform. The billionaire's offer was no longer just words. It was reality, and it burned. Every morning, Marcus pulled on his faded janitor's uniform, the fabric stiff from years of bleach, and walked into the tower that seemed to mock him more each day. The floors he scrubbed now reflected not just the footsteps of powerful men, but the shadow of his decision. His coworkers noticed the change. His eyes carried secrets, his back hunched not just from labor, but from the weight of compromise. Whispers followed him down the hallway. Whispers travel faster than wind in places where pride is currency and dignity is the only shield the poor can hold. The billionaire played his role perfectly, smiling in the boardroom, shaking hands with investors, making headlines as the man of vision. But behind closed doors, in moments where walls had no ears, he reminded Marcus of his place. Cold stares, sharp words, mocking laughter that echoed in Marcus's head long after the man had walked away. It was never enough that Marcus had agreed. He had to be reminded, over and over, that he had been bought. At home, Marcus tried to hide the storm from his family. His wife, Clara, saw the dark circles under his eyes, the way his hands trembled when he poured water into his cup. She asked questions he couldn't answer. Their children clung to him, their tiny voices filled with joy when he walked through the door, never knowing the price their father had paid to keep food on the table. But the whispers grew louder. The secret was leaking. His neighbors looked at him differently, eyes narrowing with judgment, tongues clicking in disgust. The janitor who once walked invisibly through the world was now a target of ridicule. The man who sold his dignity, they muttered. Marcus's heart cracked every time he caught the laughter behind his back. And yet, the billionaire wasn't done. No, humiliation was a game he played with precision. One evening, Marcus was summoned to a private office. The space reeked of power, mahogany desk, leather chairs, golden cufflinks glinting in the lamplight. The boss sat back, sipping wine worth more than Marcus's yearly salary, his eyes gleaming with arrogance. He reminded Marcus of the deal, not because he needed to, but because he enjoyed watching the man squirm. Every sentence dripped with condescension. Every smirk cut Marcus deeper than a knife. Poverty had forced Marcus into a cage, but the billionaire made sure he knew the walls of that cage were lined with shame. Weeks turned into months. The arrangement took its toll. The janitor's health deteriorated under the weight of secrecy and stress. His wife's patience thinned. Her questions turned sharper, her suspicions more painful. And Marcus, once a man of quiet pride, began to see his reflection as nothing more than a ghost. His eyes were hollow. His soul was bruised. Then came the breaking point. The billionaire's empire threw a lavish gala, an event glittering with wealth, crystal chandeliers, champagne flowing like rivers, women in gowns that sparkled like stars. Marcus was summoned, not as a guest, but as a reminder of his humiliation. The boss paraded him quietly in the shadows, ensuring that Marcus's presence was known to a select few, letting the whispers multiply. That's him, they sneered. The one who sold everything. Marcus's heart pounded as he walked through the crowd, the smell of perfume and money choking him. He could feel the eyes burning into his back, the smirks slicing through his dignity. And yet he endured, because in his pocket, folded carefully like fragile glass, were the visa papers. Proof that his suffering was not in vain. Proof that his children might one day walk free where he had been shackled. But deep inside, Marcus knew something darker. Papers couldn't heal a broken spirit. They couldn't erase the shame that trailed him like a shadow. They couldn't silence the billionaire's laughter. And soon, even that fragile hope began to crumble. The billionaire delayed the process, excusing it with legal jargon and bureaucratic red tape. The dream Marcus had clung to started slipping like sand through his fingers. His nights grew longer, his thoughts darker. He had sacrificed everything, and still, the promise dangled just out of reach. The humiliation wasn't just private anymore. It became public. Coworkers mocked him openly. Neighbors avoided him like a plague. His wife's eyes filled with tears not of love, but of betrayal. The man she had once respected was now a stranger in her home. Marcus could barely meet her gaze without breaking inside. The janitor who once dreamed of freedom now lived in a prison of whispers, a cage of broken pride, shackled by a deal that had only deepened his chains. And yet, somewhere in that darkness, a spark flickered, a tiny flame that refused to die. Because humiliation is a cruel master, but it often births rage. And rage, when it matures, transforms into something unstoppable. Marcus began to collect things. Papers, receipts, records, conversations remembered word for word. He hid them carefully, like weapons. Not physical weapons, but truths. Truths sharp enough to cut through lies, powerful enough to shatter arrogance. The billionaire believed Marcus was too broken to fight back, too humiliated to ever rise. But he didn't understand one thing. A man beaten down by poverty, mocked by society, and scarred by shame has nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing left to lose is more dangerous than a king with an army. Marcus's back was still bent, his hands still calloused, his name still dragged through the mud, but his spirit had begun to shift. The fire of poverty had forced him into submission, but now it was forging him into steel. The lie revealed itself slowly, like poison dripping into water. At first, Marcus thought it was delay, ordinary bureaucracy, visa papers shifting from one office desk to another. But soon the truth became undeniable. The billionaire had no intention of keeping his word. The promise that had chained Marcus to humiliation was nothing more than bait, a cruel joke dressed up as hope. He sat alone in the tiny apartment, his back hunched over the table, the dim bulb buzzing above him. His wife's silence was heavier than her words, her eyes red from tears she refused to let fall in his presence. Their children slept in the next room, curled under thin blankets, their dreams untouched by the storm tearing through their father's soul. He clutched the papers he had been given, papers now worthless, empty shells of a promise never meant to be honored. His hands shook, not with weakness this time, but with fury. The humiliation replayed in his mind, the smirks, the whispers, the gala, the billionaire's laughter. He had carried the shame like a cross, believing that on the other side there would be redemption for his family. But now he realized he had been played, used, broken, and thrown aside. Something inside him snapped. The quiet, obedient janitor died that night. In his place stood a man whose pain had hardened into rage, whose humiliation had sharpened into resolve. A man who understood that the same poverty which had chained him had also stripped him of fear. Because what else could they take from him? What more could they steal when he had already been dragged to the lowest pit of humiliation? Marcus began to collect the fragments of his suffering, each one a weapon. Every late-night meeting, every hushed word, every smirk, it was all evidence, all ammunition. He started digging quietly, moving like a shadow in the very building he once scrubbed clean. He found records tucked away in forgotten drawers, contracts signed under false pretenses, receipts of deals laced with corruption. He memorized dates, times, faces. His mind became a vault, his heart a furnace. The billionaire noticed something changing. Marcus no longer bowed his head when their eyes met. He no longer trembled under the weight of commands. There was a steel in his walk, a fire in his gaze, a storm waiting to be unleashed. The boss dismissed it at first, laughing it off. A janitor, he thought. What can he possibly do? But arrogance blinds the powerful, and arrogance would be his undoing. The whispers in the company shifted. First it was laughter at Marcus's humiliation. Then it was confusion. Then fear. People noticed the quiet way he moved now, the intensity with which he watched, listened, remembered. The same man they mocked as weak now carried himself like a soldier waiting for battle. The same eyes that once filled with shame now burned with defiance. Marcus no longer walked with the weight of defeat. He walked with the weight of justice pressing against his back. And though his family still suffered, though his wife's silence still cut him like a blade, he knew redemption was near. Because poverty had taken everything, but now it had given him a weapon no one could strip away. The fearlessness of a man with nothing left to lose. One night, while cleaning an executive office, Marcus uncovered a folder left carelessly on the desk. Inside were documents so damning they made his hands tremble. Proof of fraud, proof of bribes, proof of betrayal far deeper than what had been done to him. The billionaire wasn't just a cruel man. He was a criminal cloaked in wealth. Marcus stuffed the folder into his cart, covering it with rags and cleaning supplies. His heart raced as he wheeled it down the silent corridor, every step echoing like thunder in his chest. By the time he reached the basement, sweat drenched his shirt. He locked the cart away, his hands gripping the metal handle with shaking determination. This was it. This was the fire he needed. The next morning, he sat at the breakfast table with his wife, the papers hidden beneath his jacket. For the first time in months, he looked her in the eyes. She saw something different, something fierce, something alive. He couldn't erase the pain he had caused, couldn't undo the humiliation, but he could fight. And she, though still wounded, saw the spark and silently nodded. From that moment, Marcus became more than a janitor. He became an architect of exposure, carefully building the downfall of the man who had mocked his poverty. He reached out quietly to those who despised the billionaire, to journalists hungry for scandal, to lawyers who whispered of corruption. Piece by piece, he placed the puzzle together until the picture was too big to ignore. The billionaire's empire, so tall, so arrogant, so untouchable, now trembled on a foundation of lies Marcus was ready to reveal. He imagined the man's smirk crumbling, his arrogance turning to ash, his laughter silenced by the very pawn he thought powerless. And Marcus promised himself one thing. When the moment came, when the truth finally shattered the gilded walls of the empire, he would not hide. He would stand tall. He would let the world see not just the billionaire's corruption, but the resilience of the man they tried to destroy. The janitor was no longer a ghost, no longer invisible, no longer broken. He was fire. He was storm. He was justice waiting to roar. The day of reckoning arrived like a storm breaking the sky. For months Marcus had carried the weight of humiliation, the scars of betrayal, the sting of whispers. But now he carried something heavier, truth. Truth that could pierce steel, truth that could bring empires to their knees. His evidence was a firestorm in his hands, and tonight, that fire would burn. The billionaire stood at the center of his glittering world, his empire draped in gold and arrogance. A gala once again, chandeliers blazing, champagne bubbling, cameras flashing. Men in tuxedos shook his hand, women in silk kissed his cheek, journalists scribbled stories of his success. He laughed, loud and confident, the same laugh that had echoed in Marcus's nightmares. He believed he was untouchable. He believed his lies had buried the janitor forever. But Marcus was there, dressed not in his faded uniform, but in a simple black suit borrowed from a friend. He walked into the hall not as the invisible janitor, but as a man carrying thunder in his chest. His heart pounded with rage and justice, his eyes fixed on the man who thought power was eternal. He felt the weight of every insult, every laugh, every tear his family had shed. Tonight, the world would feel it too. The murmurs began when Marcus stepped forward, his presence strange in a room of elites. Some recognized him instantly. The janitor, the subject of whispers. Cameras turned, flashes burst, faces leaned closer with curiosity. What was he doing here? Why did his eyes blaze like fire? Marcus reached the center of the room, the billionaire's smirk frozen at the sight of him. For a moment, silence gripped the hall. Then Marcus pulled out the folder. Thick, heavy, undeniable. Proof of fraud. Proof of bribes. Proof of everything the billionaire had built on lies. The crowd gasped as Marcus spread the papers on the table, the pages spilling like weapons of truth. Journalists surged forward, snapping photos, capturing evidence that no amount of money could bury. Lawyers in the crowd snatched documents, their eyes widening with every line they read. The empire trembled as the truth bared its teeth. The billionaire lunged, his face red with panic, his mouth spitting words of denial. But it was too late. The room was no longer his kingdom. His power had evaporated. The same crowd that once applauded him now whispered in disgust, their faces twisted with betrayal. Investors backed away. Friends disappeared. His wife's face hardened. And Marcus, the man he had mocked, stood unbroken in the center of it all. Cameras flashed brighter, capturing the reversal, the poetic justice. The janitor who had once scrubbed floors now stood as the destroyer of empires. The man who had been humiliated, mocked, reduced to whispers, now roared without saying a word. His presence was enough. His courage was enough. His truth was enough. The billionaire collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands, his world crumbling around him. The laughter that once filled his chest was gone, replaced by silence heavier than chains. He looked up at Marcus, and in his eyes was not arrogance, not power, not even anger. It was fear, raw, undeniable fear. Marcus's heart swelled, not with vengeance, but with justice. He thought of his children, who would grow up free. He thought of his wife, who would see her husband not as broken, but as unyielding. He thought of every poor man and woman who had been crushed by arrogance, every soul that had been mocked for their poverty. Tonight, he stood for all of them. The police arrived, not for Marcus, but for the billionaire. Flashbulbs lit the scene as officers read charges, cuffed wrists, and led the once mighty man through a sea of flashing lights and shouting voices. The crowd cheered, some in shock, others in satisfaction. The empire had fallen. The storm had come. Marcus stepped out into the night air, the cool breeze washing over him like baptism. For the first time in years, his shoulders felt light, his chest free, his eyes clear. He had carried poverty's chains, borne humiliation's scars, endured betrayal's poison. But now he carried victory. Not the kind stamped on paper, but the kind written in fire across the night sky. He walked past the flashing cameras, ignoring the questions hurled at him. He didn't need to speak. The world had seen enough. His silence was louder than any speech. His story was already a roar spreading through the streets, through headlines, through whispers that would no longer mock but admire. And as he walked into the darkness, his heart burned with one truth. Poverty may force a man into corners, humiliation may strip him bare, betrayal may scar him deep. But resilience, fire, and truth will always tear down the walls of empires built on lies. If this story moved you, don't stay silent. Smash that subscribe button right now, hit the bell so you never miss a story, and tell me where you're watching from. Share this with someone who needs to know that no matter how heavy the chains, no matter how deep the humiliation, the fire of truth can burn it all away. Because silence protects cruelty. But voices, our voices, protect justice.